Hello, BookTube. Well, as you know, if you've been watching this channel, we are thickly embroiled in Season 2 of Has Steve Read It? This is a phenomenon that Matthew at Mayberry Book Club started a while ago in Season 1, where he pulled some books down off the shelves in his tiny house and said, has Steve read all of these? And it turned out a whole bunch of people had that same question. They wanted to know, have I read all the books in their library, including the ones, as Hannah at Hannah's Books puts it, the ones that are on the fringes of their library. The ones that they might like and be really interested in, not give up, never think of reselling, but they wouldn't really think about mentioning on BookTube. And that first season flushed out quite a few of those books, and it was fascinating. And the goal was to see if you could list entirely books that I had not read. You come closer and closer to victory the more books you can list that I haven't read. But that's a fine line. You want to pick books, 8 of them, that are in English or translated into English. You want to pick books that you have read or that you own. You don't want to go hunting around on Goodreads or Amazon for the most obscure thing in the world. You don't want to pick the most obscure and niche books in your own collection, things that you know I won't have read. In other words, you have to walk a fine line between something that I will have read in a lifetime of reading, a huge amount of books, and something that there's no chance that I'll have read. And everybody's doing a fairly good job at that, but there are perils. there are perils. On the one end of that spectrum, the peril is that I will accuse you of an a-hole pick. Now, no one's actually done that yet. You're all really good about that, mainly, I think, because we're all friends here. So there haven't been any flagrant a-hole picks. The closest we've come is slim volumes of Canadian poetry. But even there, as has been pointed out, the publishers were fairly reputable. But the other end of the spectrum of peril is that you pick a book that is simply too obvious. Like, for instance, the category of a facepalm, where you pick a book that, in retrospect, on reflection, it seems impossible that you would actually believe I hadn't read the book. And then there's the quantum facepalm. I don't have a demonstration of the quantum facepalm. And that is where there is some really good evidence that I have read the book. Have I interviewed the author about it? Have I reviewed other books by that author? It seems very likely if I have done that, that I will have read everything by that author. Something like that. And then there is the facepalm singularity, the quantum singularity facepalm. And that is where there is direct documentary evidence that I have, in fact, read the book under question. Now, there have been no quantum facepalms and no facepalm singularities. There's been no... Oh, no, the facepalm singularity is if I am blurbed on the paperback that you hold up by name. If my name is on the book and you just haven't bothered to check. But no one has had either one of those. No one has had a quantum facepalm, and no one has had a facepalm singularity. And we've also had we've had no winners. There's been no one who's gotten 8 books that I haven't read, which are signified by little schnauzer heads, 8 beans. But there have been no losers either. There's been nobody who's had 0 beans. There have been people milling around. One hears rumors of the fact that they've started a sort of disreputable band of brothers type thing that all have 1 bean. And then there's a few people who have 2, a few people who have 3. And for a while, we had a sovereign of the known universe. Hannah at Hannah's Books, her brilliant son Abe, got 4 beans. And for a while was the sole ruler of the universe. He has had to make room for a co-ruler of the universe. Sean D. Standfast also got 4 beans. But the contest goes on. There are plenty more videos that I haven't gotten to. And Jim at Jim's Books, Reading, and Stuff is making a playlist and updating it of all of the responses here, all the videos and all of my responses. There are quite a few videos on there that I haven't got to yet. I'm going to make a response for almost everybody that I can think of, unless the response would just take too long. And we don't know, because of all those people who haven't entered the ring yet, we don't know if we're going to have another winner. So what are we going to look at today? Today we're looking at Peg at the History Shelf, a wonderful BookTube channel. I'll leave a link to her video down below. As she attempts to enter the ring a second time for Has Steve Read It Season 2. Now, Peg, as you know, if you watch her channel, specializes in history. It's pretty much all she reads. And as you'll know if you watch my channel, I love history and biography, and I read a lot of it. I read an enormous amount of it. So if Peg is going to stick to the books that she knows, she's on perilously thin ice as it is. And she may be operating under another handicap as well. that we will get to at the end of this video when we do our gruesome recap. So let's see how many, not so much beans, but boomers she will get. How many little schnauzer heads called Boomer will she get? Let's see. She opens her video by saying that she could have picked obscure stuff, including a title on underwater lesbian basket weaving that, having had her mention it, I now want to read. I'm sure I'm not the only one. If there's a book out there on underwater lesbian basket weaving, I might like to read it. It sounds pretty interesting. But she didn't do underwater lesbian basket weaving. She wanted to be very fair. She mentions in her video that she is a follower of the rules. She is a conscientious person. She could be at an intersection alone in the middle of nowhere with no traffic anywhere around, and she would still wait for the light to turn to walk. Which in Irish Catholic South Boston is known as having a severe mental illness. But the world couldn't exist without such people, so God bless. Let's see how she does once she leaves underwater lesbian basket weaving behind and ventures into her main choices. The first one is Lord and Peasant in Russia by Jerome Blum. And this is a study of serfs. It's a study of serfdom in Imperial Russia. And it is a yes, and it is also a facepalm. Because although the subject might seem a little bit abstruse, the book is a towering classic in the study of this field. If you want to read about Imperial Russia, you're going to come across this in every single bibliography of any book ever written. It's also fairly good. It has a very kind of that dry, very pointed academic style that I actually love. It's a rarefied taste nowadays. Nobody writes it and nobody reads it anymore. But nevertheless, this book it came out 50 years ago, 60 years ago, and it had a huge print run. It's been reprinted. It's been put in school courses. There's no chance whatsoever that I haven't read it, and I have. So we start off with a yes and a facepalm. So we can only go up from here. The next one she picks is In the Eye of the Storm, George V and the Great War by Alexandra Churchill. This is a study of King George V of England, the very first modern monarch to actually use the family name Windsor, because at the time it seemed a little impolitic for him to have a long German surname when England was at war with Germany. And this is Alexandra Churchill's study of the way his participation in the war, learning how to fire a pistol in the yards of Buckingham Palace or whatnot, wearing a uniform, contemporary military uniform, was really kind of his introduction to the broader British public. And it's a yes. And it's about the House of Windsor. And it's about the First World War. It is also a facepalm. There is no chance on earth that I would not have read this book. It coincides with two of my most pronounced historical interests. I have read it, and it is a yes, and it is a facepalm. So, Peg's score so far is 2 yeses and 2 facepalms. So we'll move on. Her next book is a book called Ireland by Gustave de Beaumont, and it is an absolute classic historical treatment of the subject of Ireland. My last name is Donoghue. My genetic heritage is 100% Irish. I have lived in Ireland. I have read everything there is to read about the histories of Ireland. And even if I hadn't, this book has been on 80 million curricula. It has been in every used bookstore in the country. It is a yes, and it is yet another facepalm. So Peg is at 3 yeses and 3 facepalms. We're just going to move on. That's all. We're just going to move on. The next book is A Few Reasonable Words by Henry Regnery, who's the founder of Regnery Press. And this is a collection of his occasional writings, his addresses to neo-Nazi gatherings, his more literary extemporaneous remarks to Sons of the Klan or whatnot. And there are literary bits scattered throughout as well. And that makes it a yes. Of course, this is a yes. I might even consent to having this book here on my overcrowded books about books section. If I saw it at the Brattle for $1, I might do it. But it's not just a yes. I mean, it's a book by a publisher about publishing and about books. So it's yes and It's a facepalm, but it's also a grist for a rant because Regnery Press is an odious institution. They're an odious publisher. You would know that if you knew nothing more about them than the fact that when the arch traitor, the traitor to the United States, someone who should have been arrested and executed, uh, named Josh Hawley, a young wannabe dictator you have heard for years, cable news heads, talking heads say, you know, the danger is not Trump. The danger is someone who is as autocratic, as deceitful, and power hungry as Trump, but smoother. And those cable talking news heads have always talked as if that creature is far on the horizon, slouching towards Bethlehem to be born. But it's Josh Hawley, and he's right there, out in the public eye. And when his book was canceled by his publisher because he was an enthusiastic proponent of the violent insurrection to overthrow the United States government on January the 6th and install Donald Trump as an unelected dictator for life, his enthusiastic support of overthrowing the United States government caused his publisher to withdraw his contract, and Regnery snapped him right up, as they always do. No matter who it is, no matter what neo-Nazi piece of trash it is, Regnery's right there to snap them up. Anyway, that rant could go on for several hours. I'm going to curtail it, but nevertheless, this is a yes, and because it's about books and literature, I think it counts as a facepalm. Which means, let's do a little recap here, that unbelievably, Peg is at 4 yeses and 4 facepalms. So we're going to move on. We're just going to move on. The next book that she picks also reflects her, like the Blum book, reflects her interest in all things Russian. And this is The Imperial Russian Army in Peace, War, and Revolution by Roger Reese. And although there are rumors in certain parts of Oxbridge that I have had quasi-marital relations on 3 separate occasions with Roger Reese, I have read this book, but it's not a facepalm. It's not. I don't have as pronounced an interest in all things Russia as Peg does or as Olive does. I think it's fascinating. It's a fascinating subject, and this book was good. It was a little bit on the dry side, but it's not a facepalm because you couldn't look at it and say, well, okay, given the given, Steve must have read that. So it's a yes, but at least it's not a facepalm. So we can move on. We've got new spirit in our step. So let's move on to the next one. The next one is Meade, The Price of Command by John Selby. This is a biography, a military biography of General Meade of Gettysburg, the subject of a new book that I just showed on this channel, that I just got on this channel. It's a Civil War biography of a major figure. It centers on Gettysburg. It is a yes, and it is also a facepalm. And it might also be the grist for a rant, because in her video, Peg actually tries to defend Meade, as has become sort of au courant to do, to try and defend this guy. I went on a little lecture about him just the other day, how he was the commander at Gettysburg, the Battle of Gettysburg. And this was the battle where Robert E. Lee, for reasons passing understanding, decided on a full frontal assault on entrenched positions uphill of an enemy whose forces outnumbered him 2-1. He had Pickett march his men under fire the whole time up a slow incline across a vast distance. And they were annihilated. They were chopped to pieces by those guns. Only, I think, 2 or 3 men actually reached their destination. And most of the rest of the entire brigade, the regiments, were just destroyed on the field. Whole clouds of body parts flying into the air at any one time. The remnants of that attack, one of the most disastrous frontal attacks in military history, fell back to the southern lines. They couldn't really regroup. They were gored almost unrecognizably, and then collected their badly mangled and wounded into a baggage train that went on for miles and limped away from Pennsylvania. They limped south, back to the south from the battlefield, and Meade let them go. And in her video, Peg and I could have so many historically charged debates. In her video, she says that Meade barely beat off Pickett's charge. That certainly is not true. Meade had vast reserves of men and material that he never even needed to touch, and he had unbroken supply lines and a huge field of operation behind him. barely beat off because a couple of lunatics made it all the way to the top of the hill, even though they'd been shot 5 times, is not the same thing. No force approached his works. Nothing approaching a force approached his works. And Peg also says that when the Southern troops tumbled back to their own lines, Meade's men had been marching for a long time. They were tired. They were hungry. They'd been depleted. And I wanted to say to her, in fact, I did say out loud to the screen, soldiers sign up to fight when they're tired. Okay. Lee got away to make war another day. The South got away in order to continue killing people. Lives lost on the southern and northern sides were all as a result of Lee's decision that day. He had men who were tired. Sure, it takes a bit of work in a hot afternoon to blast people to smithereens from the comfort of your readout. But he also had thousands of men in reserve who had not seen combat, who were not tested, and who could easily have been rotated forward. It's not like rotating them forward would have made him vulnerable to a southern counterattack. There was no chance of a counterattack. He could easily have annihilated Lee's army, captured, and, to my lights, preferably executed Robert E. Lee right then. The South would have sued for peace. And that would have been the end of it. And nearly 2 more years of bloodshed would have been avoided. But and the Grant presidency would have been avoided. But one way, we would have had a Meade presidency instead. One way or another, there's no way to defend this guy at Gettysburg, and yet Peg's not the only one to do it. There are people defending Meade at Gettysburg. Kind of amazing. But one way or another, this is a yes, and it's facepalm. We are back to facepalming. My face is getting tired. But we're going to move on. So what is... Oh, God. Oh, no. Okay. All right. The next one. The next one is Apostle by Tom Bissell. And this is a terrific book about the original followers of Jesus Christ and the early years of Christianity. A terrific work of writing, very spirited, no pun intended, very engaging. It's a yes. It's a facepalm. And it is also our very first quantum facepalm. Not because I'm on the paperback. I don't know that I am, and I think Peg held up the hardcover anyway, but because Apostle features in one of my Steve Reads Year's Best list. The year this book came out, I think it was 2017, 2015, something like that. This book is on that list. Now, I don't expect you all to read every word that I have written about books in the last 350 years, but I expect you to have printed out and memorized my year's best and worst lists. Those lists extend all the way back, thanks to the Donoghue interregnum, they extend all the way back to the year 1990. That's a lot of best and worst lists, and they are, needless to say, definitive. And this book is on that list. So there's no doubt not only that I read it, but that I loved it. So it is, Has Steve Read It, Season 2's very first quantum facepalm. So we're going to move on. Peg has one book left. she has one book left on this list. We're going to see how that goes. The next one is There Are No Dead Here by Maria McFarland Sanchez-Moreno. And believe it or not, this is a no. This is a no. It's not a yes. It's not a yes and a facepalm. It's not a yes and a facepalm and a rant. It's a no. I have not read this book. It sounds interesting. It's in my wheelhouse in terms of time. I'm sure that at some point a publisher sent it to me. But I have never read it. Whew. So, if we do Peg's tally, we see that she has only one boomer. She is in that aforementioned group of ne'er-do-wells I mentioned that are at the Squealing Pig every Thursday night to cry in their beers. She'll be joining them. They are the One Boomer Club. She has one boomer and 5 facepalms and 1 quantum facepalm. She's just lucky that the rules of Has Steve Read It Season 2 do not subtract a boomer for every facepalm. Those rules could easily say that next year, but this year they don't. She squeaked in a technicality. And why is her tally this way? Why? I mentioned that at the beginning, I mentioned that one of her shortcomings, one of her weaknesses in doing Has Steve Read It Season 2 might be that our interests so neatly overlap. She reads tons of history and loves it. I read tons of history and love it. It makes sense that her peril would be greater. But I mentioned she has another obstacle, another handicap going into this thing. And she alludes to it herself in this video, and you'll be able to see it. She alludes to it in her video, and also her comments about General Meade also allude to it. She's too nice. She's the nice one. I get the distinct impression that if she had taken more consultation from her significant other, Martine, this list would have been a little meaner and might have been a little more successful. I think I know now, beyond a shadow of a doubt, who's the one who yells at the bad workmen when they have work done at their place, and it's not Peg. I have a feeling it's not Peg. I bet she would be the one who would say, well, yes, there's a hole leading to the outside world, but I guess you did your best. Whereas Martine, I think Martine has more of a temper. So maybe for Has Steve read it Season 3, should the Lord above decree that we're all here to have one, maybe Peg, if she wants to enter again and improve her record, and let's face it, she could hardly make it worse, maybe she should consult a little with Martine and make her choices a little meaner, a little more competitive. But in the meantime, that is our episode of Has Steve Read It Season 2 this time around, and the number of face palms. Half my face is numb. And a quantum facepalm, a book that I not only obviously would have read, but that there is explicit documentation that I read it and loved it. And for all I know, I am quoted on the paperback. I'm not sure one way or another. One way or another. Let's see if the next contestant, we're going to wait until Monday. We're going to give everybody a chance to recover from this debacle. We're going to wait until Monday, and then on Monday we'll see if the next contestant can do any better. So I will wrap this up for now. I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.